Settle in for the second episode of the night. We're heading out for a stroll. A late night, everybody's already asleep stroll. Hopefully we get some exploratory investigation work in here. I did my best to stay silent as I collected a pricket from the mantel and lit the candle in the fireplace and headed out for a stroll. It was quite cold out now. I thanked God for my cozy robes. The thick woolen fabric did an admirable job of protecting me from the elements, and I could ball up the extra fabric of my oversized sleeve to keep my free hand warm. I wandered back and forth across the landing a few times. It was a lot more confident spending time alone outside now that Eustace had outed herself as my mysterious stalker. I descended the stairs nearest the dorms and did a few slow laps of the cloister, deep in thought. Should I tell the superior? I felt uneasy about this. Margaret and a few of the others had seemed to balk at Adela's idea of involving her. Then again, I would have to report to her sooner or later, and it would be hard to pretend that nothing had happened, especially since I hadn't even gotten the answer from Catherine that I had promised to make my priority. Oh well, it hadn't been for a lack of trying. Perhaps I could corner Catherine before service tomorrow. She hadn't seemed unwilling to talk at all, just unwilling to do it in the company of others, which I could understand. Oh, right. It was like a whispered, hushed thing. Like, we can't talk about this here. And then it got interrupted. On the other hand, what if Eustace had handed me the evidence I needed anyway? Who else could have beheaded someone? But the woman with access to that sword. Oh, how cavalier Eustace had been with her threats, too. Cease your meddling? In retrospect, Eustace's attempt at a booming, authoritative voice had been a little unconvincing. I'd been swept up in the moment, I suppose. Nonetheless, her threats seemed quite targeted. It wasn't the first time Eustace had advised me to keep my nose clean. Yo, that's a Crabble Snitch quote. I took a turn out of the cloister and into the paths between mostly unused rooms and buildings that the superior had led me past on the way to the hospitalum. The brisk night air was doing something helpful for my thoughts, at the very least, and I wanted to stretch my legs further. Eustace controlled access to that sword, there was no doubt about that, and thinking more on the situation, was there really any other reason needed to finger her as the perpetrator? Catherine had been beheaded, and the wretched tool had been left in the cloister as an ill omen. I had no idea why Eustace would want to kill Catherine, but was that my responsibility to find out? I'd been charged with finding Catherine's killer. Catherine had been killed with a sword, and that one sword in the Abbey resided under lock and key, a key that Eustace controlled. What else was there to it? As I wandered the path toward the outer wall of the Abbey, I became surer and surer of this line of reasoning. Why did the why even matter? Oh, I wasn't here to judge. I thought about Flora. If Eustace was found guilty and handed over the diocese, maybe the clouds surrounding that abbey would part. Maybe she could be happy. And I thought about Catherine. Something was weighing on her, and it was clearly something to do with the night of Catherine II's death. Had she seen something? Was she just simply too afraid to speak? She certainly left in a hurry after Eustace's little stunt backfired. This, too, might be resolved if Eustace was found to be the guilty one. I reached the end of the courtyard, and I stood in the shadow of the crumbling outer wall. Goodness, they really should have built a gate here. Anyone could come into the Abbey from this direction if they braved the hill and the cold. Could have been anyone. And yet, the longer I turned things over in my head, well, the more I thought about those ghost stories people had told earlier in the evening. That cloud of negativity. Maybe it really was a haunting. Eustace had been dressing up as my ghost, but what about Flora's? Adela's? Was every ghost story here a tale born of Eustace's mean streak? I found that hard to believe, as much as it astounded me. Demons and devils, and they infested this place. Saw a light out in the distance. My heart dropped out of my chest. I scrambled ahead, through the open archway in the wall, desperate to see what was out there on the moorland this late at night. The rolling hillocks made it difficult to get a good look from my position, and so I did my best to quietly hop and sprint forward, keeping myself in as high a position in the rolling field as I could. The light ahead of me kept dipping out of sight. Finally, I got close enough to get a good look at their shape. They were taking the same route that the Superior and I had traveled the other day. I froze. The traveler hadn't seen me, but they were liable to at any moment if they happened to look over their shoulder. Looking back on it, the intelligent choice would have been for me to turn back to the Abbey right away, wake the Superior up, and catch Eustace, I was assuming, in whatever duplicitous act that she was up to. But perhaps through a mixture of wine and whatever Darcy had given me earlier in the evening, I wasn't acting intelligently. Not to mention the sheer rush of shock that I was feeling at that moment. I followed her. Now, it wasn't easy. It was quite cold out, and even in the moonlight I had to rely on my candle to watch my footing. A strong gust of wind could have extinguished my light, but mercifully it survived the whole trip. What would I have done if she had turned around? Can't say for sure. I presume I would have blown the candle out and run straight backward? After an agonizingly long walk, we arrived at the hospitalum. My heart was pounding out of my chest. The figure ahead of me broke left, around to the back door that the Superior and I had taken down to the lower level of the building. My first impulse was to watch through the small window I had seen at the top of the dungeon, but, well, I realized how obvious that would be if either of them had happened to look up. I blew out my candle, just to make sure that I was invisible. Another part of me wanted to simply tackle the mystery nun on the stairs before she could even get to James, demanding to know what she was doing out here. But I reasoned it would likely be more useful to hear what they were going to talk about. Were threats going to be made? Would I learn some earth-shattering secret that would illuminate the whole conspiracy that I was working to unfold? I stood close to the window, as I could while still feeling reasonably out of sight. This frustratingly made it impossible to see what was happening. I was hopeful that the sound would carry, but they spoke quietly, and the echo made it impossible to discern anything meaningful. I could at least make out that the tenor of the conversation was calm. I'd been worried that I was about to overhear an intense argument or violent threats, but whatever James and his mystery liaison had to say to each other, it never rose above a dull whisper. I wanted very badly to take a peek through that little window, but the moonlight was such that anyone passing in front of the opening would be supremely obvious. The conversation grew quieter, and I became worried that they had grown suspicious. Eventually, I made out a sigh of resignation. I suddenly realized that if the conversation came to a close while I was still here, I would have to follow the person I was spying on back to the Abbey, as I was now without candlelight. And I didn't want to further risk being caught following this person. So I crept away from the wall I had been pressed up against, and then began to sprint back toward the Abbey. I hoped. Anyway, it was very dark outside. There was enough moonlight to see the general shape of the ground in front of me, but little else. I ran as I had never ran in my life. I was out of breath quickly, and soon after that I could feel a sharp pinching pain in my side. I stopped every now and again to collect myself, making sure not to change direction on accident. I didn't even know if I had started running in the right direction. I just knew that further adjustment would surely result in disaster. And I had never run like this before. It was making me aware of muscles and bones that I had never realized existed. My inner thighs felt stretched and ready to snap. My chest grew tight. Whenever I pushed myself particularly hard, that pinching pain returned harder and with a pulsing rhythm that I could feel under my skin, as if lute strings inside me were being plucked. Bodies are surely disgusting things, aren't they? Miraculously, it seemed that I had aimed true. I could see the Abbey walls ahead of me. I'd veered a little, somewhere along the route, but not as significantly as I had feared. I slowed my sprint to a canter, and then eventually to a limping walk. I made it through the archway I had walked through earlier, and then my knees gave out. I fell to the ground, completely exhausted, rolled into the grass next to me, and attempted to get to my feet, but I was spent. I retched a few times. Groaning, I made it up on all fours, black bile spilling out of my mouth into the grass with another heave. I realized that it was mostly wine I was expelling. Sore and sickly, I was truly pathetic to behold. I could feel my body giving up. I struggled to remain awake. I couldn't just pass out here, but... Hedwig, what are you doing out here? I scrambled to my feet. Catherine was standing in the archway, looking concerned. Oh, I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk around the Abbey, and, I must have pushed myself too hard. Goodness. Do you need any help? She was smiling, but looked rather peculiar. She held her hands behind her back. It was a rigid pose that I had never seen her stand in before. No. Thank you, though. I see. Well, have a good night. Catherine? What were you doing? Well, the same thing you were, of course. I can never sleep after a night of Misericorde drama. What did you and James talk about? I felt a surge of bravery. We were alone, and, well, it was the middle of the night. She couldn't weasel out of this one. I don't know what you're talking about. Catherine, please. She sighed deeply. Listen, you gotta promise not to tell anyone about this. How do you know about James, anyway? I asked the superior to introduce us. Since I was replacing Catherine II, as a chronicler, I wanted to know what I was stepping into. And he told me that he didn't kill her. And then he told me that you could vouch. We stood in silence for a moment. And you believe him? I do. And, what do you stand to gain from helping him, exactly? It just seems like the right thing to do. I wouldn't want to occupy a position that I had lingering questions about. Catherine nodded, looking less confident than I'd ever seen her. Very well. Well, I can certainly tell you that he did not killer. Really? How? He mentioned something about a tunic. What did he tell you? Well, that was more or less the whole of it. I was trying to ask you for the details in the Misericorde. Well, I know he was not wearing a tunic when Catherine II was found. How? Because he was with me. He didn't slip away? No. I am quite sure of that. Where were you? In my dormitory room. Really? Well, why? Hedwig, please. This is humiliating enough. Please don't make me say it. What? I'm confused. Oh my goodness. Catherine, Hedwig, this would feel precious if I didn't feel so, mortified. All I could offer her in response was a blank expression. Hedwig, James and I, well, we had a relationship. A physical relationship. I know he didn't kill Catherine because, we've been fucking. Is that conclusive enough for you? Is that what you wanted to hear? Hedwig, are you? My energy had finally dried up completely. My knees gave way. I saw a smear of stars and then black. Hedwig! Hedwig! There she is. Thank goodness. Thank you for your assistance, Moira. What happened? Well, I was on a walk to the privy and found you passed out on the path. Huh? Wait. No. Oh dear. She's still delirious. I'm beginning to worry that the thin mountain air just isn't very good for her. Do we have any dried fruit around here? Yes. One moment. I was lying on the floor in the superior's office. Moira and Catherine were standing above me, both looking very concerned. Moira most especially. Catherine's concerns, it seemed, went beyond my well-being. Do you remember what happened before you fainted, Hedwig? Catherine and I were talking. And no. That was after I found you. Moira, listen, I'm quite worried about this. The superior returned with a small wooden bowl. Moira plucked a small dried berry from it and crouched down to feed it to me. Something sweet might help, at least. So you were on a walk, Hedwig. You look exhausted. Yeah, I was unable to sleep. Sleep deprived. Of course. Well, that explains the confusion. Yes, it would. Thank God you went to the privy when you did, Catherine. I don't particularly love that phrasing, but yeah. The berry that Moira had given me was definitely sweet and delicious, although I wasn't really sure how that helped. Nonetheless, I was lucid enough to understand that Catherine was signaling to me that this information that she had shared with me was not something that she wanted discussed in front of Moira and the superior. Begrudgingly, I played along. Yeah, I remember now. I was restless after what had happened in the Misericorde, and well, I went for a walk to clear my head. I think I probably had too much to drink. Oh dear. And what happened in the Misericorde? Nothing you need to worry yourself with, Superior. Just our typical womanly exploits. The superior sighed, but didn't push the subject. Well, thank you, Catherine, at any rate. God only knows what could have happened to poor Hedwig if you hadn't found her. And thank you, Moira, for being on hand to help her. I was on my way to the privy as well when Catherine found me. What luck. It was a strange but welcome miracle. Well, I see no reason for you all to be crowding my floor at this late hour. Off to bed with you all of you, of course. I was pulled to my feet by my would-be saviors and guided toward the door. Oh, and Hedwig, if you don't mind, well, I'd appreciate you checking in tomorrow after service. Just so that I can confirm that you're well. Yes, Superior. Once through the door, I was able to move with my own strength. I was sore, all over, but I could walk at the very least. The three of us walked in silence through the cloister, toward the stairs to the dorms. Moira let out a lilting chuckle at one point, and I could hear Catherine exhale warily through her nose. I had half a mind to slap Catherine the way that I had Eustace. I wasn't sure I could ever look at her the same way again. I felt ashamed to be protecting this dirty little secret for her, and even more ashamed that I had seemingly instinctually agreed to do so. What was this place turning me into? I realized that I was still carrying the pricket, looped around one of my fingers. I was stretched so thin that I hadn't thought about it the whole walk back. I placed it on the mantel when we arrived at the dormitory. Well, good night. Good night, Moira. Yes, good night, you two. And thank you. We were all speaking in low whispers as to not wake anyone else. Don't mention it, silly. I actually would appreciate it if you truly didn't mention it. If Flora or Margaret hears about this, I'll never hear the end of it. Mention? This evidently miraculous convergence of, Moira and I's bodily needs. Privy humor? It's the lowest of the low. Naturally, Flora finds it uproarious. Shh. We split up and went to our separate doors. Catherine had to open and close hers with great care, as it was still creaking terribly. I sighed and collapsed face first into my bed. I didn't even have the energy to undress, and I was asleep before I hit the pillow. I dreamed of soldiers chasing me with pikes. And I awoke feeling even worse than when I had fallen into bed. The soreness in my body had escalated to stiffness. I groaned aloud as soon as I realized that I was no longer sleeping. I would take my chances with the armies in my dreams. I could hear people shuffling outside of my door. I was somewhat surprised that I'd even managed to wake up at my usual hour, considering how late I had been up and how exhausted I had felt. It was all I could do to roll off the bed and stumble out of my room to join everyone for service. I could barely stay awake through the whole thing, which made me feel wretched. Feeling the last of my tea here. Last little bit. I had already foregone praying the full set of the hours. If I couldn't even make it through those compromise services, who was I? Hedwig, how are you feeling? How on earth could she be so chipper after a night like ours? Oh, I'm fading, I must admit. She giggled and offered a sympathetic expression. I gave her a perfunctory smile back and took off in the direction of the superior's office for our requested meeting. I made it there before the superior did. She was a few minutes behind me, no doubt the last to leave the chapel. Goodness, Hedwig, you know you can always skip the morning service if you feel ill. Well, I'm quite all right. She unlocked the door and ushered me in hastily. So, yes, you're a superior? I do hope that you have some news for me, even with your little tumble. Yes, as a matter of fact. She nodded with faint approval and urged me to sit down. I did so gratefully, and she in turn sat in her grand chair. I was able to speak to Catherine, ask her about the tunic. Indeed, well, she can vouch for James. Well, that's fantastic news. What did she say? How did you approach the subject? As the evening wore on, things got looser and looser. I simply asked the question at an opportune time. In my head, I was navigating through a thick fog, unsure of how much information to divulge to the superior to spare her the embarrassment of hearing it and me the embarrassment of having to say it. Is that all? You seem a little worse for wear. I heard whispers of things getting rather heated. How so? Well, Angela was in here complaining about something or other at one point. Yeah, there was a bit of a kerfuffle at one point. I see. She finds making friends rather difficult, I'm aware. Is that all? Nothing relevant. No. She raised an eyebrow. No, actually, that's not true. Eustace knocked on the door at one point later in the evening, dressed as a ghost, and waggled a sword at me as some sort of mean-spirited joke, and then I slapped her across the face quite hard, and then I think Flora might be plotting to run away, which would be horrible, and we have to help her see reason. And then after the evening fell apart, well, I couldn't sleep. I went on a walk to clear my head, but I saw something towards the hospitalum. I followed them, and, well, it was Catherine, and then I heard her talking to James, but I couldn't quite hear what they were talking about. And then I ran all the way back. I was in the dark. I collapsed on the path, and then Catherine found me, and that's when I really asked her about it. Okay? She admitted it. The thing about the tunic, she said that she saw him that day. He was without one, and both the superior's eyebrows were raised now. Well. And then, yes, I realized I was panting. And then nothing. Sorry, I got carried away. That's everything. So, Catherine spoke with James in the middle of the night. Huh, how odd. I fear that this doesn't allay my suspicions. No? He claims that Catherine can vouch for him about his tunic that's supposedly able to clear his name. But if they are conspiring in secret, how do I know the whole idea wasn't concocted out of thin air? Well, I suppose there's no way of knowing. I applaud your investigative work, but I'm afraid this puts us right back where we started. Not without further corroboration, anyway. As this is tainted testimony at best. I had a strong suspicion that Catherine had been telling the whole truth to me that night. She'd been very reluctant to speak on it, and her strong hints in this very office that the embarrassing truth was my secret to keep didn't feel like they were part of some grander lie. Surely, if this was the case, she would be spreading the lie farther afield, but I couldn't bring myself to tell that to the superior. It was embarrassing, and it was based entirely on my personal feelings, and if by some small chance Catherine was capable of murder, well, I wouldn't want to make myself her next target. It was tainted testimony, in particular given Catherine's circumstances. Unless... Is there another detail here that makes you find this story more believable? I'd reneged on my promise to tell Catherine not to speak a word of the night's events to anyone else already. But something else was keeping me from sharing that final, perhaps critical element of her story. I felt I felt dirty just thinking about it, and I didn't want to even imagine what Catherine might do if she suspected that I had blathered out about her liaisons with James. Especially, I remembered with a shiver, while she still had access to that sword. Even if she was innocent of Catherine's murder, I worried that I might become her victim if I had used this information against her. Hedwig, tomorrow I would like you to travel to the village with some companions. These words felt like a cold bucket of water. The village? Indeed. Don't worry. As I said, you will not be alone. I realize it will be a new experience. Catherine will be included, I presume? Goodness, no. Moira and Eustace. That'd be fine. Not Eustace. Please. Now, we can't have you two falling out over this. You must work together. I'm sure I do not need to remind you that you must maintain a healthy relationship with everyone. But must I? Of course. For heaven's sakes. Don't complain. It's not often that someone gets to go down to the village. A trip with Eustace might do the both of you some good. Get some fresh air with your compatriots. Commiserate over a change in scenery. It wasn't long ago that she was in here speaking quite highly of you, I might add. Well, what is it that we'd even be doing in the village? There are people there who would be able to provide some insight into how seriously we should take this James and Catherine insistence. Goodness, it's a shame you weren't able to hear what they were talking about. It would save us a lot of time. I weighed my options. As stressful as it was to imagine, I decided that a trip beyond the bounds of the Abbey would be preferable to risking Catherine's rage. Besides, the Superior seemed quite adamant about the idea. I shouldn't have followed her in the first place. I certainly wouldn't have suggested it, but it was brave of you. You're beginning to think on your feet. Perhaps those chess lessons are helping? Quite possible. Anyhow, knowing that Catherine and James were in communication complicates things. However, perhaps we can glean some idea of whether she knows something and is helping James out of guilt, or if something more sinister is going on. I'm afraid I don't follow. Hedwig. Do you not know why Catherine left the comfort of the village? She did mention it last night, in the Misericorde. Something about local politics. She offended the wrong person, or something like that? The Superior let out a surprising chortle. I see. Well, I suppose that's not untrue. Still, I am rather surprised. I would have expected the rumors around her to be one of the first things that you had heard. What rumors? That Sister Catherine murdered her husband. I nearly choked on air. What? The Superior held a hand gently. I don't believe it, for an instant, to be clear. In fact, I find it very likely that this is precisely the kind of story the people she expressed contempt for would concoct in order to harm her reputation. She was in a competitive business, you understand. Or rather, her husband was. I tried my very best to keep up with this conversation, although my throat felt bone dry. It was difficult to get the words out. And what was that? The vineyard, of course. You might see it on your way down the mountain. It's a particularly good one, I might add, at least for this country. All our wine uses grapes from the slopes of Linbarrow. So you think that her husband just died? And she was blamed? I have no proof, but it is more believable than her killing someone. But this is Sister Catherine we are talking about. That's Sister Catherine of a few years ago, at least. No. Her story is that the man fell down the stairs and some unscrupulous hawks saw an opportunity to stop her from inheriting a fortune. So in the village, speak with the townsfolk. I'm curious how they feel about Catherine now. Well, perhaps there's a pattern that we've overlooked. I thought that you believed her. Surely this is a waste of time. While I do believe that Catherine is innocent of murdering her husband, I must confess it is purely a gut feeling. Poke around for me, and see if there's any evidence to support that claim. It would be good to show the bishop some support from a source who is not also accused of a similar crime. Oh, you are worried that Catherine and James are conspiring, and you think that they might have killed her for, what, together? Thanks to your intrepid investigation last night, we can no longer rely solely on them vouching for one another. We have a responsibility to follow up on their connection, no matter how I feel. Perhaps I have been played for a fool. We'll concoct a simple cover story for your visit, bringing some finished wine or some other goods down to share, perhaps. My heart sank. I had just put Catherine in harm's way, it seemed. Although, perhaps I was in harm's way, around Catherine. Oh, this was all too much to keep in my head at once. Just say it, a voice inside my head murmured. Just tell the superior that Catherine has been... What should I ask? Who should I speak to? Just speak to whomever will give you their time. Bring the topic up carefully, and just get a sense. A sense? A sense. Anyway, this is good. We're making progress. You're doing quite well for yourself, I must say. You are quite resourceful. Thank you. But does Eustace have to come with us? You know, if I'm really going on this village trip? As I said, it sounds like an opportunity to mend whatever bridge between you has already broken. I see no reason to keep you apart. All I could do was sigh. I was pouting just a little, I'll admit. I'll meet you halfway. I shall send the word to both Moira and Eustace for you, so that you'll be spared at least one awkward conversation. Is that fair enough? Thank you. She sighed and rested her chin on her hand. Sometimes I wonder how I manage. Sounds like you could pen a whole book about the drama happening beneath my station this week alone. I look forward to reading your chronicles one day. It's not so bad. So I thought, until, well... She made a cutting gesture across her neck with a grim expression on her face. I used to think it was good to let these things be and let the sisters sort things out amongst themselves, but... could I have prevented Catherine's murder? If only I had taken a more active interest in the whispers that would stop after I had turned the corner. Surely I don't know. I don't like the meddling. And now the circumstances have conspired such that I must meddle greatly through you and... Well, alas. I noticed the faintest whiff of wine on her breath as she exhaled a deep sigh. I'm afraid I'm in no state for chess this morning. Have a productive rest of your day, Sister Hedwig. I stood up from my chair and clasped my hands together, holding them out half-heartedly. Thank you, Mother Superior. I'll endeavor to do so. She nodded and beckoned to the floor. I left swiftly. I could feel the pressure building in my head beginning to match the aching in my body. I groaned aloud and rolled my head around my shoulders. It was a lovely morning, at least. A wispy cloud of fog had settled over the grass in the cloister, and sunbeams reflected out of it at pleasing angles as I walked past. "Oh, Hedwig dear, good morning!" Marta and Charity were seated in wooden chairs at the edge of the grass, looking perfectly relaxed. I smiled wearily and waved at Marta, who beckoned me closer.
In trouble, were we?
Oh, no. The superior just wanted to report on how I was feeling. I fainted last night, on my way to the privy.
Oh, dear. Well, we had quite a night, didn't we? Charity's been telling me all about it.
There was a dark glint in her eye that I did not altogether appreciate. Oh, I feel so ashamed.
Don't be. Lord knows I've wanted to smack Eustace more than once. She can be a pompous little thing, and she deserves it for scaring you girls witless. Still, I didn't know you had it in you. Nor her, for that matter.
I had no idea either. I've never struck anyone before. I abhor violence.
Well, don't we all until it suits us? Just try not to make a habit of it.
She says as if she never did.
My fighting days are behind me, I'm afraid. It's much more difficult to bring people upright with only harsh words. I've tried hitting some sense into these women, and well, it hasn't taken. I've tried pleading with them about the virtues of living well, and, well, that never stuck. I'm afraid, then, that I must instead simply appeal to your good nature, Hedwig. I don't want you to end up like Catherine.
Oh, well, goodness, I apologize for offending you.
Oh, no, you didn't. She didn't. Did she, Marta? No, not at all. I'm just reminded of Catherine's flirtations with that particular kind of apologia. Nobody really abhors violence.
I failed to turn the other cheek, as it were.
As I would have as well in your position.
Oh, Marta, you're just in one of your moods.
I'm starting to realize that I've been in one of my moods since Catherine was taken from us. And well, I'm not sure I'll ever fully recover.
As if that's your fault.
Was it not? I totally gave up on her. Her gift for persuasion was too much for me. I let her get away with too much. Catherine's silver tongue stayed my hand too often. Do you remember when she locked Flora in that box?
Oh my, yes. What happened?
One day I went down to the cellars a little early and, well, I heard an alarming racket coming from one of the crates we use for packing wine bottles. I opened the lid and what do I find inside? Poor little Flora, gasping for air, curled up so tight I had to enlist two sisters to help pull her out.
It was a very strange morning.
Flora, of course, would say nothing. She was very loyal to Catherine. Catherine, though, confessed to everything almost immediately. She admitted that it was all this big practical joke that had gone too far and that she hadn't known that that lid was too tight to let the air in.
Why on earth would she think to put Flora in there in the first place?
Only God knows that. Flora adored Catherine, and they at least shared a wicked sense of humor.
Was Flora all right? Oh, she was beside herself for a day or two.
And took it out on me, if you can believe it.
Goodness.
Catherine thought, or knew, I suppose, that she could get away with anything.
Why did she confess so quickly, then?
That is a good point. Why did she, Marta? You see, even in death she can bargain her way out of scrutiny. She didn't admit to anything because she felt ashamed. She admitted to it because she had already gotten away with it. Flora had been found safely, no harm in Catherine's eyes. Another lesson avoided. Off she went on her merry little way, with nothing but a minute's awkward conversation as penance.
Well, I think you're being a mite too harsh.
Who would punish her? Not the superior. Lord knows nobody would break that unspoken agreement to cut her out of our affairs that Catherine orchestrated. And would I punish her? I should have, but no. It was too late by then. I was already under her spell.
Well, punishing her wouldn't have changed what happened to her.
Would it not? That I don't know. I don't believe in random chance. All flowers are seeds sown. I could have shaped her into someone great. Instead, well, I gave up trying. Catherine is my greatest failure.
I know you don't mean all of that. I know that you miss her.
Oh, I do. Despite it all, I do.
Charity had started getting glassy-eyed. Marta reached over to touch her plump wrist with her own bony fingers.
No, there's no getting wistful in front of poor Hedwig. I'm sure she has better things to do than listen to two old bats whinge. Where are you off to, Hedwig? There is another chair around here somewhere. There it is, right behind you.
Oh, I'm off to the library, actually. Marta's dark mood certainly hadn't sold this as the most appealing way I could imagine spending my morning.
Chronicling? Well, that can wait, surely.
Not like you're going to forget last night anytime soon, eh? In the end, I didn't need much convincing. The longer I could put off running into Eustace, well, the better, even if Marta was feeling particularly sour. I brought the spare chair over and sat down for more conversation.
So, aside from last night's escapade in the Misericorde, how have you been doing?
Oh, very well. Very well. I mean, there is a lot to get used to, but I'm adjusting. Is there anything still confusing to you about the outside world? Oh, loads, I'm sure, but I'm carrying along. I did learn that there was a war going on, and that was quite a shock.
Oh, that whole thing feels like it's been going on for most of my life.
It used to be more of a worry, but these days it's exhausting to even think about.
It was a little more concerning when, oh, good Lord, Hexam was well over 20 years now, wasn't it?
And Hedgley. We were a little more worried when those were going on. A bit closer to home, those were.
You would have been here in 64, Hedwig.
Just about, I think. Were you as well? I don't like talking about myself.
Not far. I was at the Abbey across the valley and down the hill. Bournegrove. I moved around a lot in those days. Durham, Richmond, Ripon.
What side of the war are we on?
Oh, I wouldn't worry about any of that.
You'd be hard-pressed to find any strong opinions on the war here, I'd reckon. They're fighting over who gets to be king. Well, that's well above my opinion.
The church is above all of those things. These are petty, worldly squabbles in the end.
Even though the royal bloodline is anointed by God?
That may be so, but, men have found so many ways to bicker over the specifics of what God has said.
Too right, too right. And what about you, Charity? Have you always been here at Lynbarrow?
For a long time, yes, but not forever. I got my start at Bournegrove, actually, and followed Marta here when she transferred.
We were too good of friends not to go together. Isn't that right? Marta had a thin smile on her face. Oh, what a nice story.
Indeed.
Have you been making any friends with girls your age? The girls. This felt like a patently ridiculous way to describe a group of women that I'd assumed were mostly in their 20s and 30s, but perhaps I'll understand when I'm Marta's age. I worry that I'm losing more than I'm making.
I'm sure that's not true.
I know for a fact Moira's quite taken with your presence.
And Darcy, for that matter. And we don't invite just anyone to sit with us.
Isn't that right? I smiled and leaned back in my chair. It was hard to get comfortable when my body still felt bent completely out of shape. Well, thank you. I should probably get to work.
Godspeed.
We're on your side.
God bless her, but it was a mean thing that Eustace did.
I stood up slowly and offered Charity an appreciative smile as I left. I made my way upstairs, dreading what the rest of my morning was going to look like with Eustace across the room from me. But it turned out that she was not there. Either she had finished her work while I'd been dawdling, or she had let her own discomfort get the better of her and do what I wasn't strong enough to, and simply not show up. I sighed and sat down at my desk. I opened up the massive book I was filling with my daily chronicles, but I was unsure what to write. The amount of delicate pruning I would have to do made it difficult to know how to begin at all. Against my better judgment, I was not about to commit Catherine's sin to writing, and I didn't particularly want to immortalize my altercation with Eustace. Or did I? I considered that extolling these sins might take some of their weight from my shoulders. If I was not being entirely truthful to those around me, I could at least be truthful to myself and God. I was being changed in many ways outside my cell, but I didn't want to become a liar. I was no liar, I told myself. I was no thief. I scratched my quill against the page idly as I debated in my own head. It was so quiet in the library that the sound seemed to fill the room. It didn't help me decide at all. As Charity had said, it wasn't like I was about to forget any of this. I closed the book and stood up. I at least had the wherewithal to recognize when no work was about to get done. Eustace still hadn't shown up. I looked toward the bookshelves, the one that seemed to stretch on forever into the darkness. Without Eustace here. Could I? No. Hurt as I was by her cruel game of dress-up, I had no intention of exacting any more revenge upon her. Slapping her was already beyond the pale. Breaking her library rules, well, that would just be petty. Wouldn't it? I found myself in argument with my own reasoning once again. They were just books, after all. What right did she have to tell me what to do? Was I so cowed by her that I feared what she might do if I touched her precious books? Set one of them out of order?
Oh, hello.
Darcy had shuffled into the library carrying a long hooked staff that I could only assume was a shepherd's crook. Oh, hello, Darcy. Can I help you?
Well, actually, Eustace sent me.
Oh.
She's feeling under the weather, and she can't make it to the library today.
Oh, that's quite all right. I understand.
She suggested that I take you out with me to watch the sheep today.
Oh, well, I have work to do still, actually, but...
Oh, don't worry about all that. You could just do that tomorrow. I'm not always in charge of the sheep. You do not want to miss this. Come on. It's time for sheep.
I couldn't say no to her, especially after what Charity had said earlier. Oh, all right then. Darcy beamed and beckoned for me to follow her. I think that's where we'll call it. We'll start next time in sheep. I think that's a perfect point, a perfect cliffhanger. We avoided the narrow confrontation with Eustace, and Darcy's giving us some sheep reprieve. Thanks everybody for hanging out tonight. This has been awesome so far. A great night. And we'll keep it moving. We'll keep it moving next time, next week, next Sunday on Misericorde. Thanks everybody.